morning, everyone. First, I want to thank the organizers. They've been doing such a wonderful job. I know it's not easy. It makes it look easy from our end, but a lot of hard work. Roger and I go way back when. I used to be his TA in Calgary. When I was his TA, Argentina decided to invade the Falkland on Malvinas Islands. And so I decided to take over his office. Except that I knew he had a sense of humor, but I didn't know how sharp it was. So he counteracted immediately. So we went back and forth about 10 times until the Calgary Sun became interested in our story and wanted to take pictures and so on. Unfortunately, that's when things got serious in the war and people started dying, and then we also put a stop to it. But it sort of brings back memories. So I have a theory. Yesterday we started out with a wonderful talk about the map and the atlas. And I think that the organizers were thinking, get people in the morning, let's talk about atlases. And that's why I was put in the morning too. Because let's face it, atlases for cartographers, it's a bit like the fix that you need. Doesn't matter what kind of atlas it is, I want to look at it. The Triple Prescription Program Atlas is kind of a different purpose atlas. The College of Physicians and Surgeons, or CPSA, asked Cartographic Health Intelligence to create an atlas showing the data collected through the Triple Prescription Program. The Triple Prescription Program is basically the drugs that are dangerous. So a prescriber will give you a prescription, and there's 3 copies of it. One goes with you, the other one stays with the doctor, and the other one goes to the college. So that way there's 3 copies of it. So the pharmacist gets your copy, and then they send it in. And then they actually manually enter the information from that. That way they can track what's going on with that information. And because these are dangerous substances, if abused, this is why they track this information. The first challenge was getting access to the information, because you can't get more private information than this, pretty much. So, getting access to it and holding it carefully and safely and so on is the first challenge. The CPSA was provided with the data, and then they were also given access to it by Okaki, so they could interact with the data and then using visual tools. Started out with the data cube, but then moved on to more visual kinds of tools. 2008 started with a report. It wasn't quite an atlas yet, and there was a basic simple analysis of the available data and concentrated on looking at the number of patients, prescribers, and prescriptions. The data is collected by pharmacy location. So that original one was showing basic graduated circles around the different cities where the pharmacies were located and showing what kind of things were going on within those communities. And it also included things like, for example, here we have information about the triple prescriptions and how many were dispensed, how many were not submitted, how many avoided, how many stolen, how many missing, because that's one of the things you have to worry about with those things, right? That some of those pads get stolen and then somebody makes money by selling fake prescriptions. The actual real atlas was done in 2011 using data from 2001 to 2010, and they looked only at opioids, so painkillers. And they were looked at basically just the top 6, just to start out with. And one of the things that we had to start out with was fairly generalized geographic regions, because we didn't trust the data that much at this stage. So when you don't trust the data a lot, you don't want to drill too much geographically, right? So we started with fairly generalized geographic areas until we felt more comfortable with the data. And this gives you a sense of what kind of map that looked like. So we see that, there was more of a problem here in the south, and in the north, less of an issue with this particular analgesia. In 2012, we knew the data a little bit better, and so we went to the 35 subzones, which are smaller, and now we started getting more opioids and getting a little more information about what's going on here. So here we see then a little more detail, and then we can start seeing comparisons of one type of analgesic to another, and get a better sense of what's going on. So some of these patterns that were missing before because it was more generalized, now we start picking out. And then you sort of have to always wonder, are those patterns real, or are they because, there are glitches in the data. So you always have to be very careful how you work with this. The problem with the TPP program is that somebody has to manually enter the data, and some records are missing, etc. So we moved to the Pharmacy Information Network. Every pharmacy now has to enter information about all the prescriptions, and that gets stored in the central server somewhere. Getting access to that data was a nightmare, needless to say. But this atlas decided to use this particular set of data, and now we could actually look at benzodiazepines and other categories of drugs that are also dangerous that weren't showing up in the TPP program. So, like I said, in 2014 we got into the benzodiazepine. In 2013 it was a standalone report. 2014 got incorporated into the atlas itself, and we were able to move to smaller geographies once again. And we see here now we see much more interesting patterns. We also started picking out some interesting things about the data. We can only capture the data at the pharmacy level, not the resident level, because that wasn't quite trustworthy. However, there are no pharmacies up in this area outside of Fort McMurray. So Fort Chippewa does not have a pharmacy. So therefore, we have no data for that area. And same thing with this area just east of Edmonton. The urban part has a pharmacy, but the rural part doesn't. And that's a different geographic area. So once again, we had a blank. So that caused a bit of problems. Some people didn't even notice, but as a geographer, we geographers go, so we then, started looking into that. We added codeine. Codeine is a very common type of prescription. We started looking at what contribution that has to the total. And it turns out that it adds quite a bit, especially for people who are using these things. So codeine gets added. And then we also started looking at the actual rates with standard errors, just to be able to examine not just the map, but also the graphics interactively. And in 2016, we were able to introduce trends again, because now we had enough PIN data, and we were able to see 5 years or 4 years worth of data at this particular stage. And in 2017, we moved to a new geography, looking at the pattern of where people live versus where they go to the pharmacy. We did that spatial interaction pattern to see where we had these different kinds of circumstances. And if you can't see it. Where is Red Deer? Here we go. If we have the city of Red Deer here, I can find it in here. Anyways, it's here. That's why I put the detail. I can't remember what I've made already. There are 3 different areas in Red Deer. There's that stretch in the center. That stretch in the center was declared a geographic area for health analysis purposes because it's the, shall we call it, sketchy part of town. So there are issues there that need to be investigated, so that's why that was created. It also turns out it has most of the pharmacies in the city. So it turned out that this area here in Red Deer has a small population and had the most insane rates possible because everyone from Red Deer and surrounding areas were coming to buy their prescriptions there. So it looked like the worst possible place on earth. So this is why we got into creating a new kind of geography and called it Pharmacy Local Aggregated Geography. And so here this explains this comment here about Red Deer, that this one area just shows really crazy patterns. So the idea then was to merge these geographic areas where there was a crossover or cross-shopping pattern. People live here but do their shopping there. And so we also introduced comparison groups because we're comparing physicians' patterns to each other. So one of the things that we built is a report card that is sent to physicians. And they say, you suck or you're great, according to their patterns. But quite often, if you're dealing with terminally ill patients, you're going to be prescribing a lot more than somebody who treats children, or at least we hope so. So that allows them to, by taking the groups and saying, okay, these people will have a different kind of pattern, and we examine those patterns, then we can compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges. So that was one of the things that we introduced right here. So we show then for each particular group of physicians what, where they are within that range. And since the report cards went to the physicians, they also now have a site where they can log in anytime they want to and just see how they're doing. And that way, if they start thinking, gee, I wonder if I'm doing okay, because I've got conned into doing some prescriptions lately, they can go and check and see their reports. So this is what prescribers are doing now in Alberta on a regular basis, are going and seeing their status. So these are the aggregated geographies. And now the patterns that we're seeing are more trustworthy. So now we see that red deer is showing up okay, and it's sort of makes sense what we see there. And then we show, of course, in more detail the two large urban areas, Calgary and Edmonton, and just seeing those patterns. So now instead of having red deer as being the worst possible place, it is that part up there in Edmonton, which is actually true. That there are real issues there. So now these actually reflect what we know is true, and that's one of the essential things. When you're creating information, it has to make sense. Every year, I think that's the end of the atlas, because they have, they have Tableau tools. They can see everything interactively. They can turn things on and off. But there is something really special about having something put together graphically already with all the decisions made. And luckily, they've been supportive of new versions of the atlas. And this is one of the things that I'm currently working on, is next year's version. In next year's version, one of the things that we're doing is we're using rates, of course, to calculate this, age and sex standardized rates. When we do the tool, when you use the tool of Tableau or whatever to visualize the data, it can't quite calculate the things the same way. It's not sophisticated enough. So now we're finding a way to do it. So that way, when you look at the rates in the paper atlas versus the electronic atlas, they actually match, and they're the same color, same category, and cause less disruption in terms of interpretation. Well, the other thing is that we are doing is that incorporating the population size into the map. So you see the large northern area that looks, whoa, we have a big problem here. Well, it's large geographically, but it's a very small population. So we're introducing a way of expressing the population into both the graphs and the maps. That way we get a context of how big a problem it is. So we see this red area, but if it's a tiny little red area, there aren't that many people. If you have a large orange area, that's more of a worry, because obviously you have a lot of people there who are in trouble. Like I said, prescribers now have access to the data. We're also in the process of adding antibiotics now, just to see how prescribers prescribe antibiotics. That's a bit more challenging, because what is proper prescribing for antibiotics? And so you have to do a lot of upfront analysis to figure that out. So for right now, we'll do a small report like we did with benzodiazepines. Hopefully, we'll incorporate it into the main atlas next year. The main atlas, if you want to look for it, is this easy to remember URL. You can also do a search for the CPSA TPP atlas, and that way, it will show that as well. So CPSA TPP atlas, and it's a PDF, so you can download it, and they make this available. And there's also, if you can find it in there, you can find also the previous versions of the atlas in there somewhere. Not all of them, but some of them. So we're also working on something similar for Okaki Cree Nation. Okaki Cree Nation manages their own health data, which is similar to the situation with First Nations in BC. So that way they have better context of what's going on there, and they can make their own decisions. For right now, they don't have a paper atlas, but it's more of an interactive tool. So once again, the purposes for which the data will be used by Big Stone and by CPSA are very different, so it's not the same graphics that you put together, because it's a very different kind of organization that's managing the data. So that gives you a quick idea of what that whole project's all about. I encourage you to go and take a look in there. And if you have suggestions, criticisms, by all means, bring them forward, because that's how things improve, by hearing, comments about, especially from experts. So that it's, it'd be a real pleasure to hear from any of you. So thank you.
Okay, we have some time for questions.
So, Eric, there are huge parallels here between northern Alberta and northern BC. Mm-hmm. Are you aware of any collaboration in trying to map similar distributions?
Excellent question. The college in BC has been trying to get access to the data. They haven't been as successful as the college in Alberta. So they're trying to do, they've seen this and they want to do the exact same thing. Saskatchewan, exactly the same thing. So all three provinces want to do this. Alberta has been lucky enough to be able to access the data. Paperwork is in place and has been in place for quite a while to make that happen, but just it'd be very nice to see this. It also, the First Nations in BC, because they manage their own data, there's been also talk that they may start putting something like this together so they can actually manage their own data. So, and that would be a very good, different way of looking at the data as well, for people who know the circumstances around Indigenous communities.